Okay, you ready for the last bit? I'm going to show you several more ways in which our criminal justice system doesn't work because of cognitive processes. So here's an example. If someone ever asks you to imagine having performed some crime, don't do it. Because there's something called imagination inflation. So let's once again imagine this story where a subject comes in and you ask about their memories of various life events. You found $5, you got a terrible haircut, you called 911. And the experimenters know that some of those memories are true, and they try to implant a false memory. If they try to implant a false memory by simply asking you to imagine, let's say, having found $10, or imagine that you got stuck, your parents said you got stuck in a tree when you were 8 years old. Could you just imagine it? Maybe that'll help jar your memory. Or just imagine that you called 911, or just imagine that you broke a window. What happens to people's memories for these fake events? If you've imagined it, you're much more likely to remember having done it. And sometimes when people of interest are being interviewed by the police, they will ask them to imagine having committed the crime. Bad idea. Here's another very troubling finding. If you're an eyewitness, what happens? You see the event. Typically, a police officer asks you about the event to describe it. And then later, maybe they bring you into the police station, or the police officer comes by and shows you a lineup of possible suspects and asks you to pick out the person who you saw commit the crime. Okay, there's a phenomenon called verbal overshadowing. Here's how this study goes. Imagine that you saw a robbery. So you're brought into the lab, you've shown a video of a robbery. It lasts less than a minute, 45 seconds. Okay? Then the experimenter asks you to just, do something, a filler task. Here, do this crossword puzzle. Something to occupy your mind for, say, 20 minutes. Then your task is, okay, write down or tell me what you saw in the crime that you witnessed 20 minutes ago. So you write down everything you remember from the crime. Then you're shown a lineup and you're asked to pick out the person you saw commit the crime in the video that you originally watched. No big deal, right? It turns out that your ability to identify the suspect drops 25%. You are 25% less accurate if you wrote a description of what happened before you see the lineup. So you see a crime, some time goes by, you're asked to write a description of what you saw, and then you're asked to pick out the suspect in a lineup. You are 25% less accurate than if you see the crime and half an hour later make the judgment of who committed the crime. Okay, here's another study. It's related to source amnesia. In this study, there are two groups of subjects, and the only thing that differs between the two subjects is what they see before the experiment really goes. In the experimental group, participants see a male teacher reading to students. They watch a video of some guy reading a little story to his students. The control group watches the same sort of video, except it's a female teacher who's reading the same book to a bunch of students. That's all. No big thing. Then both groups watch a video of a female teacher being robbed by a guy. Not the teacher that they saw reading the book, someone else, another man robs the teacher. Then the task is, here's a lineup, pick out the person who robbed the teacher. Easy, right? Now, if the actual robber is in that lineup, is in the set of, say, 6 pictures of possible suspects, if the actual robber is in there, then about 10% of the time, subjects in the control group will pick out the male teacher. So that's sort of the baseline, because they hadn't seen the male teacher before. They just pick him out. But 20% of the people in the experimental group will pick out the teacher, not the robber. Okay, that's if the robber is actually in the photo lineup. Here's where things get really upsetting for people who are suspects in crime. If the photo array, the set of pictures that somebody looks at to pick out who they saw as a robber, does not contain the actual robber, then 60%, over half of the subjects in the experimental group, will pick out the teacher because they confuse him with the robber. They have seen the teacher before, but they forget where. It's that source amnesia again. The teacher's familiar, so they pick out the familiar face and say, ah, that was the robber. So many people get picked out by eyewitnesses not because they were committing a crime, but simply because the eyewitness had seen them around in the neighborhood, at the grocery store, who knows. Okay, you ready? Here's another problem in our criminal justice system. Sometimes witnesses are asked to pick out a criminal based on a lineup of pictures. And there are many different ways that you could show the pictures. We're just going to talk about 2 ways. The traditional way is to show a set of possible suspects simultaneously, that is, all at once. So on the right-hand side of this slide, you see 6 different pictures of women. That is a simultaneous presentation. Okay. But it doesn't have to be that way. You could do what's shown on the left here, a sequential presentation. You show a picture of a potential suspect and say, is this a person? No. Okay. How about this? Is this a person? No. Okay. So simultaneous versus sequential. You wouldn't think that would matter. Turns out it matters in a big way. So if you run the study, show somebody a crime and then ask them to pick out the criminal, the person who committed the crime. If you give them a sequential lineup, show one picture and then the other picture and then the next picture, almost 20% of the time, the eyewitness will pick out the wrong person. Now that's bad news. That's very bad news. But if you do the same study, have somebody witness a crime, then show them a lineup and ask them to pick the criminal, but you use a simultaneous presentation of all the different pictures, eyewitnesses will pick the wrong person 35% of the time. More than a third of the time, the eyewitnesses will pick the wrong person. This is a huge problem for our criminal justice system. Why do researchers think this happens? Well, when you're given all the pictures at once, the assumption that you make automatically in your brain is that the criminal is in there somewhere. When you're shown the pictures one at a time, you don't know when the list is going to end, so there's no reason for you to believe that the picture you're looking at now is the robber. Maybe it's one that you'll see later. And you go through all the pictures and he's not there, and that's the end of it. Yeah. Really big problem. I'm going to stop with this final one. Unethical amnesia. This is actually, philosophically, unethical amnesia could be even a bigger phenomenon than what I've told you about so far. Okay. Many times, the eyewitness to a crime was also a perpetrator in that crime, was also one of the criminals. So police, if there's multiple suspects at a crime, they'll try to get one suspect to turn on the other, right? It's like, oh, first person who makes a deal with me is going to get no jail time or something like that. Okay, reasonable enough. But how accurate is the testimony or the memory of an eyewitness who was actually one of the participants in the crime? Turns out, probably not so accurate, because there's something called unethical amnesia. We have a kind of amnesia for actions that we performed that are unethical. We have no problem remembering the bad things that other people did, but we're terrible at remembering the bad things that we did. And let me show you some data to support that. In this study, people simply read a story about cheating on a college exam, okay? And they were asked to either imagine themselves, as they're reading this story, half the subjects imagine themselves as the cheater, the person who was cheating on the exam, and the other half of the subjects were asked to take a third person point of view, not a first person, third person. They were told to imagine having seen someone else cheat on the exam, okay? And then later you ask people about their memories. The people who cheated on the exam are much less likely to remember their unethical behavior than the people who observed someone else cheat on the exam. If someone else cheated on the exam, that you remember. That you cheated on the exam, somehow our memories of that just seem to dissolve. They go away. Well, how about the reverse? How about my ethical behaviors? I'm sure I remember them as well as other people's ethical behaviors. No. If you're asked to remember good things, ethical things, social justice things that other people did, yeah, you'll remember some of them. But the ethical things that you did, wow, those you remember really well. So it's possible that some people cheat over and over again, or rob or steal over and over again because of this bias. They can't remember how many times they've cheated or robbed or stolen in the past. They can continue to think of themselves as a good person because they're much more likely to remember the good things that they did than all the times they cheated on exams, stole, robbed in the past. That's it for our lectures on memory. Everybody in my class, head back to Canvas. Those of you who aren't in my class, thanks for watching.